Welcome. Today we're going to talk about Alexander the Great. In the last few lessons, we talked about the Peloponnesian Wars and how the Persian Wars led to that, and how the Peloponnesian Wars led to the weakening of the Greek city-states, especially Athens and Sparta. Before that, we talked about Sparta as Athens as the kind of dominant Greek city-state after the Persian Wars. We talked about Athens culture and some of the things that led to Sparta and Athens having this big rivalry that eventually erupted into a Greek civil war. So, kind of recap, after the Persian Wars, the Greek city-states, especially Athens and Sparta, began to fight and form a rivalry. And during the Peloponnesian Wars, these Greek city-states fought against one another. And in fact, Sparta even asked Persia, their mortal enemy, to come in and help them defeat Athens and Athens' allies called the Delian League. And Sparta's allies were called the Peloponnesian League. The power of Greece drops after the Peloponnesian War. After years and years and years of civil war, over half a century of civil war, these Greek city-states began to weaken. And as a result, you have Philip of Macedonia, or Macedon, come down and take over these Greek city-states and unite them under his leadership. And he has the dream of not only uniting the Greek city-states, but using these Greek city-states to conquer Persia. Unfortunately, for him, his second goal does not happen because he is assassinated at a wedding. So Philip of Macedonia gained a throne in 359 BC, and he dreamed of conquering the Greek city-states to the south, which was made much easier due to the fact that the Peloponnesian Wars weakened Athens and Sparta, along with many other Greek city-states. So he forms alliances with many Greek city-states. He defeated Athens and Thebes in battle, both powerful Greek city-states at the time. In fact, Thebes was rising as one of the most powerful Greek city-states after the Peloponnesian Wars. And this brings all of Greece under his control. And you can see Macedonia on this map here is the kind of peachish colored here, and dependent territory up here. And you can see that they spread into Greece and began to take over this area. And he wants to take over Persia, which not only is this purple spot here, but it extends all the way to the East India and even down to Egypt, as you can see here. So this is Persia's empire at its peak. Philip had a much greater dream, that's conquering the Persian Empire, the biggest, most powerful empire in the world at this time, in fact, in world history at this time. Philip could not do this because he was assassinated before he could achieve this goal, and this causes him to obviously lose power and pass it down to his son, who becomes even more famous and more powerful than Philip, and we're going to talk about him next, being Alexander the Great. So assassination is the murder of a public figure, usually for political reasons. And he was assassinated, leaving his son in charge. Now, his son at the time was roughly 21 years old, and his name was Alexander, later called Alexander the Great. And you can see a common picture of him here, riding his horse. He was considered will go on to become considered one of the greatest military leaders of all time, if not the greatest military leader or the greatest conqueror of all time. And he's going to fulfill his father's footsteps after Greece revolts against him. He's going to reunite the Greeks. He's going to reunite them under the promise that if they give him all their resources, all their soldiers, and give them his allegiance, that Alexander will go out and drive Persia influence out of Greece and push and pretty much destroy or conquer Persia forever. So Persia, this empire, stretched 2,000 miles from Egypt down here all the way to India, all the way over here. And it encompasses all sorts of land, including Mesopotamia, which we talked about earlier. They have a series of capitals down through here in this area, and extends even to this mountain area over here. So much of modern day Egypt, Iraq, the Middle East, Afghanistan, and even parts of India by today's standards. So it's a huge empire. We talked about it with the Persian Wars with Darius the Great and eventually Xerxes during the Thermopylae and Salamis and the end of the Persian Wars. But the Persian Empire at this point is weakening, and their new leader is Darius III. Now, Darius III is not considered to be on the same level as his previous people. He is viewed as kind of cowardly, and you're going to see when Alexander attacks him, he's going to run away. You can see Alexander the Great's route here. So he starts down in Thebes and then goes from Pella, meets the Persians at Granicus here, follows the coastline, comes up to Gordium, where he's going to untie the knot using basically his sword, which will fulfill a prophecy that he can take over all this area. He once again meets the Persians at Issus, has a siege at Tyre and Gaza, which shows his potential brutality. By the time he reaches Memphis, he's proclaimed a pharaoh in Egypt, which means he's not only a person but a god. He goes to Alexandria, where he sets up one of his first Alexandrias, not his first, but one of them, and this becomes one of the most powerful cities in the world even today, and probably the center of the Hellenistic age. We'll talk about the Hellenistic age later, and really replaces Greece as this center for culture in the ancient world. From there, he's going to go over to Amman to talk to the oracle, and the oracle is going to give him good news about his conquest. He's going to cross back across the Nile, back through the Middle East, across the Tigris, across the Euphrates eventually, and he's going to win a battle here, take over the capital, including Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, where he becomes the richest man in world history by modern day standards, $60 billion, and he shares that with his men, back up through the capitals, including Akbantana. And at this point, somewhere along this ridge here, this is where Darius, who started running away way back when, is going to go ahead and be murdered, not by Alexander, but by his own people, Bessus. And then Alexander's going to pursue Bessus into Bactria, Sogdiana, and take over this empire, which is going to take a lot of time, surprisingly, back through the Hindu Kush Mountains, and then he's going to cut across to India, where he starts to experiencing eventually monsoons. His men are going to be rebelling against him, and this is going to be kind of the end of his expansion eastward. He's going to continue downward. He's going to defeat Porus here at this battle, and then he's going to return home after defeating Hydaspes. So this is going to be two routes here. One goes back through Persepolis. One has a sea route, and then he has a mountain route that follows. And he's going to go back to Babylon due to his soldiers no longer wanting to fight, due to the monsoons that he experienced as he reached India. But by the end, he was going through places that they didn't even have maps for. So he was conquering completely new territory for the Greeks. And everywhere he goes, he's going to set up Greek culture in some way. And the most famous way is these Alexandrias. We have one here. There's one here. There's all sorts of these in this area here. And these are Greek civilizations, city-states that he sets up to kind of spread Greek culture to these places. And not only that, he's going to take the culture that he has in Persia and in India and Egypt and all these places and bring it back to Greece. So you have this Hellenistic age where a lot of this learning is combined due to Alexander's conquest, which is what we're talking about in the next unit. So his empire stretched all the way to India. At that point, as we said, his men are going to become tired. They're going to refuse to continue east. There's going to be monsoons with heavy rain and wind. And he's going to go back to Babylon without ever losing a battle. Babylon being in Mesopotamia here, modern day Iraq. And he is going to get sick. So without ever losing a battle, he's going to make it all the way to India, back to Babylon, and he's going to have his plan to go back and conquer more in Africa, go west here and conquer Italy and Sicily and those areas, and kind of expand more into Europe. But he gets sick. Now, for a long period of time, people thought he had malaria. Now people realize that that might not be the only cause, that he might have actually been poisoned by his own men who were tired of fighting and no longer wanted to go back out and conquer again. Remember, these guys, he shared his wealth with them, so they're some of the wealthiest, most powerful men in world history at this point, and they might just want to enjoy life. So he's on his deathbed, basically. He's sick from either malaria or poisoning or other factors, and he's on his deathbed, as you can see in his picture, and his men, his generals, come up and say, who do you leave your empire to? The biggest empire in the history of the world. It's bigger than Persia ever was. And he says he's going to leave it to the strongest, which means whoever can control it can have it. Now, he knows that it's going to take a very strong man to control this area. Even Alexander himself may have struggled to control the conquered territory, let alone the area that he was planning on taking over later on. So his generals end up kind of fighting over this area. It gets split into three ways, controlled by rival generals, and even then his empire is going to crumble. Even though it was divided into three ways, it couldn't even control a third of his empire. So it's not necessarily his empire that's going to be his lasting legacy. Part of it is his strategy and the idea of military leaders not only being brute warriors, but also great at strategy and thinkers, since he was tutored by Aristotle and trained by his father from a young age. But also, it's going to be his lasting legacy of the Hellenistic culture. The city of Alexandria in Egypt is going to be a major factor in the world. Even today, it's one of the top 3 to 5 trading ports in the world. And this Hellenistic culture, which we're going to talk about in our next lesson, is the blending of Greek culture with all these Eastern cultures, which is going to lead to huge advancements in mathematics, science, medicine, literature, and really cause a lot of new learning and new ideas to be spread across the world. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please email me. I will talk to you later. Bye.